All right, guys, what's up? Hey, we have a treat for you today. I'm on with legitimately one of my favorite people to study and to read. This guy probably has no idea how much, maybe he does, but we're going to remind him today how much he's impacted the world of entrepreneurs, of producers, families. It's author Benjamin Hardy, who just came out with a brand new book, 10x is easier than 2x. And man, I have so much to tell you and so much to ask you. And but first, I just want to say thank you for making the time out of your schedule.
Dude, you're welcome. I actually am a legitimate fan of yours as well, and I like everything you say. And so I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm glad you like the work. And these things are always more fun for me when you actually have, this is your audience mostly. And so I'm excited to hear your thoughts on these things, and then I'll share whatever makes sense.
Yeah, cool. I love it. Well, man, I'll just start at the top. I read a book of yours that changed my life legitimately. Like it changed the trajectory of what I was doing. And it was a book several years ago. It's called Willpower Doesn't Work. You remember that
Mm,
book?
I do.
Um, I don't know how long it took you to write it or how deep you had to go into it, but I have bought hundreds of copies of that book. We have trained legitimately thousands of salespeople using like, hey, buy this book, fix your environment. And so you just got to know, dude, like we have pumped your material to the ends of the earth. Not that you need the distribution, but man, you have such a way of like cutting right to the heart of the matter. And so I've got like quotes and things to kind of ask you, but when did you start writing and how do you write so freaking many books? You were writing like one a year. There's two big questions right off the bat.
So are you saying when did I start writing generally, or when did I start writing Willpower Doesn't Work?
When did you start writing books and how did you get so prolific?
Um, I started writing books in 2017 is when I started. Well, so I wrote my first ebook, which is actually this book, Slipstream Time Hacking. I wrote this before I ever started blogging. So this is like a 20,000 word book. I didn't know
Okay.
what I was doing. So I wrote that in like 2 months. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I wrote that in like January of 2015. And I didn't have a blog. I didn't have a website. I didn't have anything. And I
What were
just
you
figured I could.
doing?
What do you mean?
Like, were you working or were you just kind of,
I was in my first year as my PhD program. So I mean, I
oh,
had
gotcha.
my
Okay.
so my wife and I moved to Clemson, South Carolina. I went to Clemson, and I was in my first year of my PhD program. We had just gotten three foster kids, and I actually wrote this right before we got the kids. But yeah, I was in my first year of my program, and so I was going to classes, and I worked some crappy online some crappy campus job, and I was deep. Like, I mean, I knew I was going to be a writer at that point in time, very much. But I wrote this. I actually remember writing a lot of it when my wife was gone. My wife like went on a trip with her family or something like that, and I stayed home to go to school, and I wrote a huge chunk of it. Um, and so then I started to ask the hard questions, like how do you get a publisher? How do you whatever? And then I started to realize like, oh, I have to write blog posts, and I have to build an online like an email list and stuff like that. And so I blogged
Yeah.
hardcore from 2015 to 2017, and then 2017 is when I wrote Willpower Doesn't Work, and that came out in 2018.
How did that do? Like when you launched it, was it
Are you
a
talking about
success?
willpower?
Willpower. Yeah.
Not from my perspective. It was kind of like a trauma for a while because like I
Really?
I had I had like these, probably impossible aspirations, and my blogs were so successful. Like I was an insanely successful blogger, and everything was just so easy. And then I I launched. I mean, I'm glad you love Willpower Doesn't Work. It's cool to hear your story, and I still love that book a lot. But yeah, I expected it to just blow out of the gates. You know what I mean? And admittedly, like I have weird comps because like James Clear, obviously his book sold 15 million copies now, but like he was blogging for years before me, but he actually read this book and loved it. And then he obviously was writing Atomic Habits for 3 years. And like I mean, I was blogging and I got my book deal and I ended up releasing my book before him. I probably spent like 8 months writing Willpower Doesn't Work. Um, but because of my trajectory on the blogging, I just expected Willpower Doesn't Work would explode. Maybe not at the level Atomic Habits has, but and then his book came out and it did blow up. And so I probably overly compared and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's typical.
It's
There's
it's all timing. Like it was just weird timing too. I mean, I'm happy I did it and I'm happy I continue, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's no, it's super interesting. I love you talked in the new book, the 10x book about how hard it was for James to go from writing short form to long form. Was that a challenge for you as well?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm still learning that. I mean, I would say that 10x is easier than 2x is the first book where like, and it's longer, like, as a writer, but this one's like 75,000 words. My other books are probably closer to 50. Um, but this one is the one where I feel like I actually went truly deep, like really deep, and tried to really craft it at a much
Yeah.
higher level. When I wrote Willpower Doesn't Work, I was more of a blogger. So honestly, I wrote it like blogs. Like even the chapters, I kind of thought about more like blog posts.
Yeah. When I messaged you, I think it was maybe like 8 months ago. I was like, "How you doing?" You're like, "Man, I'm dying." It's like my stuck in the middle of like finishing the book. So I could tell you were deep in it and wanting to get
My
it
wife
done.
was worried about me, man. I was redlining for a while.
Man, have you heard Robert Greene talk about his books?
No.
He's like, because Robert Greene is like
Oh,
phenomenal,
his books are like 400,000 words. I mean, they're like
dude. They're
tomes.
insane. And he's given interviews and he's like, they almost kill me. Like I almost physically die in each one.
I can say that I got kind of I'm not as bad as him, but yeah, I would say I was unhealthy for probably 2 months writing that book.
Yeah,
Like
man.
really unhealthy, not sleeping, taking way too many stimulants. Like my wife's like, "What the like? Come on!" Like I.
Yeah, dude, I know the
I mean,
feeling.
by that I mean it's caffeine on overload. But yeah, she was worried about me because I just couldn't sleep and I'd wake up at like 2 a.m. and just go on a long walk.
Yeah, yeah, totally. In I think it was like 2020 maybe or the end of 2019. Because I built these massive sales teams and the old companies we have 600 700,000 recorded sales calls from those old organizations. I remember standing in front of a group of 50 salespeople and teaching for the first time your principle of enriched environments. And dude, it just blew people's minds. Like they had never heard of it before. And the idea of like the hero being the byproduct of the situation rather than it, dude, this I'm surprised like people have got to read that book now and recognize the power of it. But it's such a central theme to building business because business is so hard and people think it's easy and being an entrepreneur is cool, but it's probably like being an author. Everyone aspires to be you, but being in the middle of it, man, it is the hardest thing you could ever do is writing great work and building great businesses. And so it's really latched on to our sales methodology. What was different about this book and why did you go so deep?
I mean, I like, what's so funny is like being so many books away from Willpower Doesn't Work. I honestly, it's very refreshing to hear you bring up some of those ideas, honestly, like enriched environments and
Yep.
even the hero. I just want to say thank you because like you're bringing me back and it's actually bringing me a lot of joy. I think that here's kind of how I write is I write about the things that I don't necessarily. Well, Willpower Doesn't Work. I wrote that book for my younger brother. My younger brother is so my, and I sort of talk about it a little bit, but when I was 11 and I'm the oldest of three, my parents got divorced and my father became an extreme drug addict. And
Mm,
so my younger brother was 9 and he did not handle it well. Like for me, I think I just internalized it and I had good friends and like I don't know, I coped.
yeah.
He got messed up. And ever since then, he still really struggles with so many things. And so that was a book that one I kind of wrote for him. I think I wrote Personality Isn't Permanent for myself, but but then after that, so like I think a lot of times when someone's a writer, they're honestly writing like for their past. But I shifted away and I started writing for my future. As things progressed, and I started writing the books that I wanted to grow into. Like I was like, I don't fully get this, but I want to get it. I want to become the master of this, but I'm nowhere near that, and I probably won't be after this book or after many. And so with 10x particularly, but even my other books, like it felt like an idea that like I had heard Dan talk about a little bit, but honestly, he had never honestly cleared the idea. It was not very clear from his teaching. And so I wanted to bite off more than I could chew and see if I could actually make this digestible, see if I could actually take this huge idea and actually like make it concrete. And so that was really my mindset there, is I wanted to see if I could actually pull it off.
You know what's so cool about that is there are so many people today who publish, because the internet's made publishing easy. Anybody can say stuff. But you seem to actually live by what you write about.
I try.
There's a quote in I don't remember what book this was, but I prepared some quotes. It's good timber does not grow with ease. Stronger the wind, the stronger the trees. He said, deep, not shallow water is what you should want to swim. And here you are actually chasing down the deep water and just jumping in. You know,
Oh
you
yeah.
live it. Well,
Yeah, I try.
Did you ever have a moment where you're like, maybe this is a little bit too deep and I shouldn't have done all of
Well,
this?
I'll tell you what happened with this book is I got so deep. So I spent 2 months practically, and it was right when it was bad timing. So last summer, May and June, we were gone for almost 2 months of a family vacation. And it just so happened that it was beautiful, but it actually was, while we were gone, we were in Europe. And this is actually where I would learn so much about Michelangelo and stuff like that, which related to the 10X book. But while we were gone, my Future Self book came out, and I literally did no launch. I literally did not launch the book because I was gone, and my publisher was like, they had huge hopes for that book, and I honestly didn't even launch it. But what happened was, so, you know, and a big part of 10X is the idea of focus and recovery. And so like, I basically took 2 months of like pure recovery, pure expansion.
Yeah.
And like, I look at flow as immersion and expansion, and immersion is like the deep focus, and then expansion is like the deep recovery and like seeing new things. And so I had gone to this deep expansion, and then I immersed myself like crazy for months to write the book. But because I went so deep, the book almost didn't get written, because I reached such a place of contradiction between the ideas of the book and honestly my collaboration with Dan, that I was like, I reached out to them, and honestly, I said, like, things need to change with this collaboration. And honestly, the book almost got like chopped blocked. Like, it was almost like, okay, we're just going to walk away from this. And I mean, this book was hanging on a thread to not be published. But I went so deep on it, and I just was like realizing that, you know, for example, that relationship was 2X, not 10X. It was the past, not the future. And then I created so many other changes, because for me, it has to be experiential. Like, I can't just be a ghostwriter for someone. Like, if I'm going to write with you, like, I have to fully know what I'm talking about. And so, yeah, it changed a lot of things and created a lot of chaos. But for me, it was great because it did lead the book to going to a really hardcore place. Like, if I hadn't had those conversations, the book would have been a lot more sterile.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely not sterile at all. It's interesting. The definition of flow you say is immersion and expansion. So I have a model that I teach internally, and it's exposure leads to expansion, which is a similar idea. It's like the exposure to new things, the exposure to new experiences. It's funny because last summer in June, I went on my first ever 30-day sabbatical.
Where'd you go? Or what'd you do?
Dude, we just did a stay at home. We went to Florida for a week. It was the first time I'd ever taken 30 days off of work. And I read, when did Future Self come out? I think I read it in June.
It came out in June.
I read it as soon as it came out. And I was telling you this offline, but I'll say it now. You have a story in the book. I think it's the Viktor Frankl story, maybe, has said, go through your life as if you're living it for the second time. And the first time you lived it in the worst way possible. And dude, I remember the road I was walking, reading that with my Kindle, trying not to get hit by a car. And you tell the story about pulling up to your front door and your daughter's there. You had a long day. I'm telling the story for you. I'm sorry, but
I love it.
And
it's better that way. It's better that way, honestly.
You're like, how would I live this the second time? You know, it would change. I would give anything to go back to when she was this age. And man, I was literally walking on this road, and I just start like literally tearing up. I'm like, that's my family. And that was a catalyst where I after sabbatical, I completely let go of everything I was building, just gave the keys to a $40 million business away. I started something new. And that was the catalyst point for me. I think it saved my family because I was making sacrifices that were not good for the fam. And man, it's such a crazy impact that you have by being a writer. And to think that you can sit down and type into a computer and you can cause this ripple effect I don't know if
It's
you've
crazy that it can
connected.
cost someone like you, like who's got a $40 million business decision. You know, what I mean, that's the thing that blows me away for sure.
Yeah, you can't get that impact anywhere else, you know?
It is a very interesting thing. And you and I were talking about just it is kind of interesting because our whole world these days is information, but it's still information still is very transformational. So yeah, it's very scalable. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's very humbling and it's very powerful. And I mean, I'm impacted every day by the right information. And that was why I wanted to be a writer in the first place, was that I read certain books that freaking changed my life. And so I was just
Mhm.
like, man, this is interesting. I want to learn more about this.
Yeah, 100%. I want to ask you a question about the new season because I've taught people for a while, like, and the phrase I've used is the new will destroy the old. This has kind of been a repeat theme. Like the number one thing that you have to do to go into the new season is you have to kill the old season in many cases. And when I read 10X, I was like, dude, this is like a Bible for me. I'm like, I'm reading. Uh you said letting go of your 80% is letting go of your identity, your activities, your situations, your people, and it can feel like an enormous loss. And it's highlighted because I'm like, man, I felt this so many times, dude, where I'm like, am I making the right decision? And you mentioned before you're heading into like practicing what you preach. How's it feel? What's it look like? What are the challenges? Like maybe just walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at every 10x, and 10x is honestly just a metaphor. It could be a metaphor for going through a from one level to the next. I look at it truly like 4 seasons. And so like, there's a spring, which is like where, you're growing massively and stuff like that. And then there's a summer where you're harvesting, and then there's the fall where you're refining, and then there's a summer where it's dying and you're like literally like letting it all go and planting the next seeds that you're going to spring up on. And
Yeah.
so I'm definitely in the winter of like stuff is dying, like the old self is dying. I look at the 80% using the 80/20, like the 80% is your past self. One of my favorite quotes that's not in the book, but it's that the system is designed to defend the system.
Mm.
And so like we as human beings, we actually we create systems to protect us, honestly, from dangers and stuff like that. And like the biggest system of all is our subconscious, which is our past self. And so um yeah, I mean, I'm deep in the season of letting things go, but I would say one thing that's really different this time than my past seasons is that I'm not like, I'm clear on many aspects of my future self, but in large part in the past I would drive from the present to the future. Whereas I've gotten a lot better at letting the future come to me. Rather than me going to the future, I'm letting the future come to me. And so I'm stripping away a lot of the past self, a lot of that 80%, and creating space. Like another great quote that, I mean, I learn way more about these books after they're gone, after it's over. But like there's a quote from Aristotle where he said that nature abhors a vacuum. And so like if you have an empty plot of dirt, like it's not just going to stay empty, like weeds are going to grow.
Yeah.
And so um I'm creating a massive vacuum right now. And it's interesting to see what my subconscious is wanting to fill it with. Um, but I'm also creating this insane vacuum and watching the David, which is my future self, like the Michelangelo David. I'm watching the David come to me, which is really cool. I've done it in the past, but not at this scale. So like I actually view the biggest leap of faith as letting go of the 80%. Like, and so I'm letting that go, kind of like you with that $40 million business. That was a leap of faith.
Massive.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm just creating that space right now, and I'm really happy with it. One thing that I will say is that we do feel like it's a loss, but I actually see it as a gain. Like you're actually letting go of something that was the past so that you're creating that space for something much better. So I actually see it as massive progress and a beautiful gain whenever you're letting go of something that no longer resonates.
Yeah, I love that. This is a wonderful reframe. I teach salespeople that you can reframe or you can re-lens, and a reframe is to change the meaning of something, and a new lens is to change the perspective of something. One thing you do really well, dude, like really well, is I am fascinated by the stories you find and put in these books, because they changed my lens. Like when you were telling the story about, I don't know, it was like a transport company for
Oh yeah.
trains or something. You remember that
Yeah,
story?
that was a construction transport company where they move like huge construction parts.
Yeah, I was like, dude, I'm playing so small because I won't sacrifice revenue systems or revenue streams. But man, how do you like? For me, the hardest part is I have a lot of I don't know if you deal with this at all, but what people think about me still matters for some. Like I'm still working through.
That's
Sometimes that
probably part of the
reframe.
80%. Yeah, that's part of your hidden commitments. That's your subconscious.
How do you deal with that? Like how do you give me the easy button? Give me the supplement.
So I would say that the two supplements for that, one is catching your hidden commitments. So Robert Keegan calls them hidden commitments. Your hidden commitments are the things that drive your behavior. They're what drive your 80%. So like there's a reason why why I do the things I do, and a lot of it may be actually stuck in the past. And so when you actually just observe your own behavior and you like then reverse engineer it, why the heck did I do that? Like why did I go and just eat a bunch of sugar? Whatever it is, it does not really matter what it is, but then say like, what is the thing about my past that enables me to continue? So that is just catching the hidden commitments, and I'm getting better and better at catching those. But in terms of kind of the letting go of what people think, I think that the two things that really helped me on that is one is the gap in the gain, which Dan and I wrote, which is honestly, I'm just measuring my own progress backwards. Like if I look at my May, I'm freaking stoked about it. Like I had a huge May. I learned a lot. I'm not the same person as I was when May started. And I'm just always viewing my current self versus my past self. And I'm always seeing that I'm not the same guy, even who I was 2 days ago. Like I can see that I'm different and I would do things differently. Actually, even yesterday, I got super mad at my older two kids, and luckily I went and apologized to them, and I'm learning to like apologize faster.
Yeah.
But also, and so here's kind of the crazy thing. I'm just gonna give you a quick model. So the typical way of looking at time is that the past drives the present and the present drives the future. So time moves forward. Mm-hmm. I much prefer to let the future drive the present and the present to drive the past. So the future drives the present. What I mean by that is I get connected to my future self, and then I let the future determine who I am in the present. And if I'm getting more and more connected to my future, then it really doesn't matter what anyone around me is doing, because my future is my own and my future self's calling the shots. Yeah. And my future self is super unique, just like yours is super unique. And it's very personal to me, and there's really no competition against my future self because my future self is just me. And so that's really what matters. And so like being really connected to my future self helps me to not worry about what people think. And then honestly, just continually viewing my own progress. Those two things really help me to stop worrying about what people think.
That's brilliant. So the future drives the present,
and the present drives the past.
So that reminds me of a quote. I think this might be from the recent book. The stories of our lives, far from being fixed narratives, are under constant revision. Do you consciously?
Dude, you're deep in the well, man. That's personalities impermanent. You're deep in. Maybe I threw that one in there, but you're deep in the well now, man.
I'm telling you. I've taken it and I've put it out there. Do you do that consciously, or yes. Does that happen every day, every week?
So I'll give you a different quote, and it's one that I've honestly thrown in probably 3 or 4 of the books, but it comes from a guy named Brent Slife. Brent Slife is a theoretical psychologist and honestly one of the coolest people I've ever met. But
what's his name?
Brent Slife. He writes very philosophical, very theoretical, deep psychology books. But you would like his book called Time and Psychological Explanation. It is a thick read, but it is a mind bend. But basically, one of the things he talks about is that it's more accurate to say that the present causes the meaning of the past than to say that the past causes the meaning of the present. And so rather than viewing time as the past is driving the present, it's actually the present that's reshaping the past over and over and over again. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that you can definitely do that consciously. Like even me, as an example, you and I talking right here and right now about yesterday, about me yelling at my kids. Mm-hmm. We can actually sit and I can actually learn more about that experience right now with you. And I can continually reframe it. Certainly I can give compassion and empathy towards my past self. I can be honest about where I was at, but also I can just continually reshape the meaning of that full experience over and over and over again if I want to and get more out of it. How I look at it is you want your past to be an asset, not a liability. If your past is a liability, then it's draining your present and your future, and you're actually letting the past be the filter through which you're moving into the present and the future. But if you're making your past an asset, then your present and your future are always getting better because of it. It continues to pay you dividends because you had that experience. And I always view it that way. Every time I have an experience, I'm going to go back and just turn it into an asset. Even if it flopped or it went wrong or like I just bombed it, like I might as well turn it into an asset.
Yeah, that's probably how you handle failure or perceived failure as well. You just turn it into a lesson or something
Yeah, that's just
positive.
anti-fragile. I just love anti-fragile, man. It's just like no matter what happens, I'll get better,
Yeah,
or at least I'll
anti-fragile,
try to.
an epic tome as well.
Dude,
It's a thick
I've
book.
listened to that book like 3 times this year. I mean, I've listened.
Dude,
I listened to it like 5 years ago, but like that's on my like repeat list right now.
you know, another book you should pick up is I just found it. It's called Wanting. It's about
Hmm.
mimetic desire.
Oh, actually, I have that book, but I haven't listened to it, and I'm
What's
all
his name?
about
Like
mimetics. I'm all about that
mimetic.
stuff.
Yeah. I'm like, wow, this is scary and terrifying. How much what I want is just I don't even know
Shaped
where it
by the
comes
outside
from.
world. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and what other people want is the drives jealousy. It drives like all of the negative sides of drive that we have. You know,
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's pretty wild. Funny story on the kids. So you have 6 kids. You're a
yeah, man.
crazy person. I have 2. And I was getting onto my daughter who's 4. She was chasing a kid around at a party and being a bully, and I had to get onto her. And afterwards, we get home, and I'm like, "What did you learn? You know, and you need to apologize for having a bad attitude." So, what did you learn? And she looked at me. She says, "I forgive you." I said, "No, no, 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 no. What did you learn?" It was like already at a 4-year old, she's already reframing situations in her benefit. Typical salesperson. Are you gonna have more kids? Like, what's the deal here? It's 6
Oh
kids. I
no.
cannot believe it. It's insane.
No, no, we basically adopted. So in 2018, which happened to be the year that Willpower Doesn't Work came out, right when that book came out, so many gnarly things were happening in my life. So I almost got kicked out of my PhD program at that time because I wrote online that I was already a psychologist. And like some people are really intense that you can't say you're a
Mm.
psychologist until you actually have the PhD. And so my advisor was like, "You're out." This was right at the beginning of 2018. In February, we adopt our 3 older kids. So that was after 3 years of battling the foster system. So we got granted adoption. So that's February 2018. March 2018, Willpower Doesn't Work comes out, my first book, and I'm stressing out. Also, that month, In Vitro works. It hadn't worked before. And now Lauren's pregnant with twins. And we're like, oh
Wow.
crap, we're pregnant month after, and which is cliche, right? A month after we adopted, she got pregnant with twins. Those twins were born in December of 2018. So we went from 0 to 5 technically in 2018. That's also when we moved to Florida because we could leave South Carolina technically because now they're not foster kids who are owned by the state. Now we have
Yeah.
them and we can leave. And my wife's a big Disney buff. So we moved here. And so we had 5 kids. We moved here to Florida, these 2 little twin girls. And then like a year or 2 went by and I was kind of just like, are we gonna have more kids or should we just like move on from this so I don't have to think about it and can we move on to the next phase? And she got pregnant naturally, and so we had our little boy, and then I went and got the vasectomy. So I'm done,
Enough
man.
is enough.
And enough is plenty. Trust
Yeah.
me.
You're
I'm
done.
done, and I'm getting aged fast, man.
Yeah, it's crazy how they change your priorities though, big time. I always
They're awesome.
I do make fun. I'm prone to making fun of the productivity advice of single people. Not single people, but people without kids. Because man, when you have kids, you can't practice any of that productivity stuff. It
I
changes
agree
everything.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I agree with you fully.
enough said. Enough said. Are you in your home office? Is that where you do most of your writing?
Yeah, yeah. So I have, there's some empty shelves up there, but yeah. So this is the second house in my neighborhood, and so I just walk around. I've shifted. I used to go to the gym every morning, but now I honestly just walk, and so I'll go to the gym like once a week. But yeah, I just walk, and yeah, I have this place for filming and for writing.
Nice. How do you come up with your best ideas? You said you're kind of, you know what you want to write about next. I'm assuming you're percolating on what you want to do. Is it just through walking, and do you have a notebook you write things down, like just tactical for a minute? What's
Yeah, totally.
your
I mean, I've drawn and written things down from what you've said in this call. Um, yeah, I'm always it's kind of a few things. Sometimes it's stuff that like with 10x that I really want to like learn more about. Like I really want to learn more about this or I really want to get better at this.
yeah,
Um and a lot of it's kind of like my future self calling, like this is what I want to get better at. This is what I want to better understand and teach and share that I think is really important and timely. And then trying to make it more timeless. But um yeah, so a lot of it's honestly just relevant to what I'm going through in the time and also where I'm trying to go. And so, the book I've been thinking about writing and procrastinating is called How to Stretch Time. And it's really about, it's not about productivity or time management at all. It's really about literally like time relativity and like literally stretching out time and having deeper experiences and experiencing more in, for example, like a day than maybe it would be normal in a year or a decade. And so, but I've been holding off because I'm like, is this even useful to write right now? So yeah, I'm always just thinking through things.
Let's talk about that, because
Go
maybe
ahead.
we can come up with some cool stuff. Because I've studied this a lot. When everyone wants to scale right now, like everyone, and but there's so many different identity bottlenecks you have to go through to scale. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is scale is simply the compression of time. That's all it is. Like you collapse things down. So if you want to do $1 million in a year and then go to $10 million in a year, you just have to do the same amount of money. That's all you got to do. It's just $1 million, but you're doing it in 30 days instead of 365 days. It's like compression down. And people tend to have an easier way of thinking about that. And I don't know if it's because they're not having to change their identity. It's the same number, or if it's just a weird mental loop. But I don't know if that's what you're talking about when it comes to stretching time, because there's this slipstream we all get into, and I found it's extremely uncomfortable when you're in like a momentum pocket, because it almost creates a distortion field. Have you studied Steve Jobs and like his leadership style and his distortion fields?
No, I want to hear about it.
So they call it the Jobs distortion field, because he would just be like, that's not good enough. That's not fast enough. That's not simple enough. Bill Gates had it. So I'll never forget, I was listening to the Bill Gates autobiography, and I think it was Buffett who got into his car, and he's like, somebody broke into your car. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, the stereo's gone. And Bill's like, no, I ripped the stereo out. He's like, why would you rip the stereo out? He's like, well, I drive to the office and I drive home, and it's 20 minutes a day. Then I'll drive to the airport, and it's like 4 hours a week. And if the radio's there, I'm going to listen to the radio. So I just ripped it out so that I can use that time to think about Microsoft. It's like, these people are crazy, dude. Like,
oh yeah,
Elon, freaking crazy. And it's this distortion field that they get into when they get into that slipstream, where something that takes 10 years for someone else takes 3 minutes for them, and it makes everyone else supremely uncomfortable. And they're kind of jerks if you study them.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you can do it from a cleaner way. Like, I think there's better ways of leadership, but I think that these people, I think that if you actually study them as they progress through their life, they actually do become more enlightened, and they become more emotionally developed. And their, in large part, their productivity doesn't actually decrease; their results increase over time. But they don't have to be so forceful. It's kind of like David Hawkins' Power versus Force. You know what I'm talking about? And I think that like that's a general progression, especially that really ambition people go through, where they reach kind of places of love and peace and harmony, and then it changes how they do things, and in a large part, things really blossom when they do it that way.
Yeah, I do wonder if they would have ever made it
if they were at that place earlier.
Yeah.
It's a really good point.
Because when you look back, I think some of it like is almost causal. Like, it's the cause of their growth is their aggression.
Yeah.
To an extent.
And then they get into an enlightened place, and then they go through a different phase of stuff.
Yeah, well, they go through the levels of energy. They go into 300, 600. I think it's Frederick. Do you know Levels of Energy, the book? Frederick something. So it's really good. It's kind of a maybe a derivative of Power versus Force, but it's a different guy entirely. And he basically is like, his hypothesis is you can't really jump levels, so you can't go from the Hawkins 100 to 700. You have to go from 100 to 300 to 300 to 600. So we'll go on these tours, and he'll be speaking. He's like, I can tell that the lowest level tolerable is apathy, because underneath apathy is the realm of negative energy. And the only way that I can get these people to care is to make them angry, because they have to go into anger, and then they go through fear, and then they jump and jump. So he's like, I'll just go into the room and I'll piss them all off. And now it's like, now they're paying attention. It's a really interesting thing of like, do you have to progress?
Taking him one step at a time?
100%. Like, would Elon be where he's at if he wasn't to some degrees a psychopath earlier on. I don't know. Who knows?
It's a really good point. I mean, I'm happy with what he's created, and I'm sure he is too. But I also know that where he's at right now, he wouldn't do things the same way he did before. So he wouldn't have made the companies he did if he was who he was now, planted in his past.
Yeah.
Who knows what the crap he would do? I mean, that would be a really funny experiment, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it would.
I actually have, if you don't mind, and we'll go wherever you want, but I actually do want to know what happened to the $40 million company and what happened since, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. So I brought in a different CEO for that
Oh,
brand.
so they're still running it essentially, but you're not in it in the day
They
to
ran
day. Is
it
that how
for
it works?
about they ran it for 6 months, and then they turned it, they took some staff and some products from it and then shut the doors of the company.
Sold it or just turned it down, like
Just
shut it
turned it
down?
down, completely shut it down.
And what happened to you?
I just started new things. So I learned a
Did you
lot
sell
through.
it? Did you sell it and walk away, or did you just walk away and have
No,
nothing?
I kept a portion of the list and some of the IP and those things.
Okay.
But you know what I learned through that process is how much of that business was built off of just me. And so we got it professionally appraised at 69 million, 68 million, somewhere around there. And it was like, we're going to sell this thing for 100 million. We'll just grow it. But buyers and prospective buyers came in, and anytime my face showed up somewhere, we got deducted. And it literally discounted the brand down to almost nothing. I mean, it was under 10 million bucks. So I was like, well, I have to rebuild the whole thing, essentially. It's doing really well, but it's not worth anything because it's me driving a lot of the IP and the products and the curriculum. So I was like, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to. I talked to a good friend of mine, and he was like, man, if you wake up every day and you're not excited about it, it's just not worth it. And then I read your book, and I was like, okay, everything's telling me the same thing. So I brought a different CEO in, and yeah, he ran it for 6 or 7 months, but then took the customer base somewhere else, and he was like, I just don't want to run it anymore. So it was uncomfortable for me because I was like, I built this thing over 7 years, and now it's just gone. You know,
So
but
where are you sitting with it now?
I am grateful for the lessons. I have put the past under constant revision. And I'm grateful that I learned what I learned because now I know like what I'm building now has enterprise value. Money for me is it's just like I was a snap and it's created. It's not I haven't ever struggled with it. So we built a new thing and it's doing really well. And it'll hit 8 figures this year in its first full year. And so it's phenomenal, but I don't think I would have been able to do that. And this goes back to the prior point about like you have to go through the levels. I don't think I would have been able to build what I built this fast if I wouldn't have done what I did with the old companies. And ultimately, if they wouldn't have cratered when I left. Because you don't learn how to build something durable until something crashes around you. Sometimes that's what it takes to learn all the lessons. So,
Yeah, I have some friends who, and I'm not going to name any names, but I've got some friends who, deep friends who, that's what they're going through right now is certain things cratering. it's
yep. Like
it's
when
pretty interesting.
when everything is built off of one, you have concentration risk inside of businesses. And we had a lot of concentration risk, not only around me, but around our advertising platforms. And so everything was driven through one main platform, which is Facebook. And when you look at what Apple did to Facebook, everyone's stuff blew up. So that was rough. I went through a lot of compliance and regulatory issues because when you like grow something from Sales Mentor was one of the companies inside of that portfolio. And in inbound closer, the freelancer sites where you can like even Fiverr and whatever, we put inbound closer on those sites. We sold so many products. I think it was 55,000 sales professionals that we trained over an 18-month period. When you grow that fast, you just like everybody starts paying attention to you, which is not always a good thing because it's like we didn't really know like what are we allowed to say, what are we not allowed to say. So it was a great experience, and I don't know, like if there's a story in the Bible about King David, and he's fighting lions, and he's fighting bears, and he's trying to keep them out of the sheep pen or whatever. And sometimes you go through that, and it's to prepare you for the real threat, which was Goliath. And it's like he wasn't ever going to die from the lion. The bear wasn't going to kill him. He didn't know that. But if he wouldn't have learned how to do battle with the bear, Goliath could have killed him easily. So I see it as like one of those things where it's like, man, I had to go through it. And sometimes the only way through is just to buckle up and go through it. But I do have some trauma around it. And I'm sort of working through that. You mentioned like the first book having some trauma. It's very interesting how there's trauma sometimes in my body. I'll be good,
Yeah.
and I'll wake up one day and I'm like, what's going to break today? And so that's interesting. Like, I don't know if you have any tools or anything to deal with that besides cold plunges, which
Cold plunges are great. Do you do that?
I do. Yeah.
Do you have a
Yeah,
cold
they
plunge at
suck.
your house?
I just ordered one. I've been going to the gym, so I've been able to do it for a couple months. Um,
That's awesome.
but I've heard there's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks about like physical I don't remember the term for it. Can kind of
They call it like somatic, right?
yeah.
The body.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I think we all have that. And I mean, I think it's good to be aware of um I mean, for me, I'm doing a lot of walking, a lot of recovery, similar to you.
Mhm.
Cold plunges, massages, but or not massages, sorry, hot tub. But when you talk about it and when you open it up, I mean, it's really actually just emotion that's there. There's actually a really good book called The Great Pain Deception. Have you ever heard of that one?
Nope.
The
I'm gonna
Great
get
Pain
it.
Deception is all about how physical pain like that, and I'm not saying you've got, but like it's honestly suppressed emotion.
Mm.
And when you start opening yourself up and talking about it and just like releasing it, the body starts to heal. So
Wow.
it's honestly, it's good to actually just recognize like if someone has like ongoing back pain, it's like actually that's just how he talks about it in that book. And it's based on a lot of research from a guy named John Sarno, but he talks just about how your body is distracting you from your emotions. And so
Interesting.
if you actually just acknowledge that it's an emotional problem, then the body's going to take care of itself.
Interesting. Yeah, emotions are a tricky one because some people are like just ignore them, but they're kind of messages. They seem to be like if you just ignore them, they tend to just become obnoxious. At least
I've
that's
heard
my
it said that their
experience.
body wisdom. Yeah, I think that emotional development and spiritual development are very connected concepts. And
Yeah.
so, if you grow and emotionally, you're going to be a lot more free from your past. You're going to be a lot easier to let things go quicker. And you're also going to be able to adapt faster to whatever growth curve you're going up.
Yeah. Do you read Morgan Housel at all?
I don't read his blogs, but I've read his book.
So his book is phenomenal, I think, and his
I
new one that's
agree.
coming out is probably going to be good. But he said something interesting about how it's actually regression that we fear the most. And so, like going from $0 to $4 million feels unbelievable, but going from $40 million to $10 million, you feel like you're physically dying. And so that was the first time I had experienced that of like, resetting from this big, empire to something small that does $5 or $6 million a year. I was like, what in the world? Like, I am literally going broke. Like, I don't know how I'm going to eat. And it's like, dude, you do 5 million, 6 million bucks, you're going to be fine. But it's just that principle of like, man, the body hates regression. Like the mind hates regression. It feels like going backwards. But I was at the gym and I go to the gym and talk to God. Like that's partially where some people go to the gym and work out. I just go to the gym, sit on a bench press and like have prayer time. And I feel like God very clearly was like, I got to reset you. And sometimes resetting feels like reversing because you're on the wrong track here. And for me, that
Resetting, though,
snapped in
is a great correction.
100%, 100%. Like, getting a chiropractic adjustment, it's like you got to put it back before it can go where it needs to go. So that's what last year was for me. Now I'll never forget it. This is the best lesson that I've ever learned
Have
inside
you
of
ever read
business.
have you ever read Peaks and Valleys?
Yeah, it's great.
That's how I look at it, is like lessons are repeated until they're learned, but often it's the valleys that cause the greatest lessons. And
Yep.
and people think that the valley means you're going backwards, but it's always going forward. Like you're actually going forward. And so you going from 40 to 10, as much as that feels like it's going backwards, was massive forward movement for you. Just like
Yeah.
letting go of the 80% for me is actually massive gain, not loss.
Yeah. Yeah. That the peaks and valleys. He also talks about timing. in the valleys, and how sometimes the time duration of the valley is up to you. And it reminds me of, there's a John Maxwell quote, and he says, how you handle failure determines how long it will be until you win again. And I was like, well, that's interesting. That means that we all need to learn how to lose, or else we're on this perpetual repeat of past losses, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I love the whole concept. Lessons are repeated until they're learned. All progress starts by telling the truth.
yep.
Every time it's like the hero's journey. Every time you go from one level to another, you have exams, you have tests, you have lessons, and they're going to just purge out all the components so that when you get to the next level, you don't have to carry any of that stuff with you. And like every time you do that, every time you go up to a new level, it's like you can vault so much faster and higher because you're not carrying any of that stuff with you or that ignorance.
Yeah, it's funny talking to you, because like what I did is I just did an 80% cut. I just didn't know that's what was happening. Like I didn't know that that's what it was.
Yeah, you
But
let
that's,
go of your 80%.
yeah, it's totally what happened. Like I just cut all of that out. But because I wasn't aware of the principle, is why the book is so good for people. Is why I'm sending it to everyone. If you know cognitively, this is strategic and it's not happening to you, you're doing it to move forward. That's probably a huge piece of dealing with the regression feeling, you know?
Yeah, to me it is. Like when you were just talking about that Morgan Housel concept, that's how I feel about it. Is I feel like that regression isn't actually a moving backwards, it's a moving forward. But that's just that may be a coping mechanism. But for me, it's like
Reframe.
I'm being required to learn from this, and it's going to either make me anti-fragile or it's going to break me. I've just dealt with so much trauma, and even just watching my own kids, that it's like I already know, even as an example with my older three kids, either their past is going to propel them to beautiful places or it's going to break them. And so whenever something's going down, and that's like the whole anti-fragile component of volatility can either make you
Mhm.
more fragile or better.
Yep.
Um, I just assume that if something's going rough, I'm getting better and that I'm going to learn and absorb a lot from it. And so I
Love it.
always look at it as going forward. Always. I'm like, this is exactly what I need. This is happening for
Yeah,
me, not
dude.
to me. Like, this is exactly what I need. And I just let the purging process happen as fast as possible.
Have you read The Expectation Effect?
No, but I've heard it's awesome.
It's awesome, and it reminds me almost of the upside of stress in certain areas, because
Mm-hmm.
essentially stress will do to you whatever you expect it to do to you, to an extent.
Yeah.
Um, but man, your expectations seem to be very, you take great care to make sure you're expecting the right thing, which is always producing the right outcome.
Yeah. Some people even call it segment intending, which is just like, what do I want to get out of this?
Yeah.
But I think that there's an openness to I'm a lot more open than I used to be to surprise. I think in the past I was very like I mean I shaped the filter and I got what I wanted out of experiences, but now I'm opening myself up more to like, yeah, there's a lot of things that I can't even plan for. But yeah, I'm very thoughtful about the expectation effect. I mean, there's a in the Gap and the Gain, I wrote a lot of research that's similar in that realm. Like there's a really famous study called the like mindsets or milkshakes study. And basically it just showed that like if you believe something's going to make you fat, like like literally it's going to change how your body digests it. Like, and they
Right.
gave the same milkshake to two different groups of people. And one of them, they said it was a healthy milkshake, like 120
No
calories.
way.
Another. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazing.
What they did is they took milkshakes and they put false labels on them. Same milkshake, 350 calories, but one of them they said it's a healthy milkshake, like 180 calories. The other one they said totally indulgent, 800 calories. And then they tested their blood, and they had them do a blood test before. So they took a blood test pre milkshake, and then they said, all right, here's the milkshake you're gonna eat. And both groups got different ones. So like group A is like, all right, this is a super healthy milkshake. It's only like 160, 180 calories. It's actually healthy. It's got nutrition in it. And so they're like, okay. And so then they tested their blood after them, even just kind of knowing what they were going to do. And then the person drank the milkshake. The other group, by the way, was like, this is same milkshake, but they're like, this is a super self-indulgent milkshake, 700 calories or something like that, totally loaded with sugar and fat. And and the people were like, all right, cool, whatever. But they tested their blood afterward, and there's like a peptide or something like that called ghrelin, which determines how hungry you are. And the people who took like the shake that was in their mind 700 800 calories, they had like almost no ghrelin in their blood. Basically what it meant was is that their brain thought that they were really full, whereas the people who thought that they consumed the shake that was like 120 calories, they had a lot of ghrelin in their blood, meaning like their brain thought that they were still really hungry. And so like
Wow.
they've done all sorts of studies on this, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I agree with it that our perception shapes our biology. I think they call that epigenetics, but it's just very interesting. You know, I got to be aware of that, because I'm like, when I start to like see like a gray hair or two or something like that pop out, I'm like, I am causing this upon myself. Like I'm telling myself I'm stressed. You know what I mean? Like I'm processing my own experiences in a much harder manner on my body than I need to, because of how I'm choosing to frame it.
Yep. Yep. Dude, there's another fascinating study that actually probably connects with your future self. It's called the Psi Heart experiment. Have you
Never
heard of
heard of it.
this?
No.
So it was a trial where people were undergoing heart surgery. This is from the expectation effect. And they took a subset and they had them do 3 short telephone calls that described what their desired experience would be, and somebody that they would connect with after, and then what they expected their condition to be 6 months after the experiment or the surgery. And the people who went through it, that went through this experiment, it goes back to perfectly what you're talking about, connecting to your future. And that's how your meaning comes from that. They left the hospital like 2.5 months earlier. They had fewer complications after the fact, completely randomized. And so they rolled this trial out across a lot of hospitals. And it's the principle of like, go ahead and set up your expectation beforehand, but also connecting it in with your future. It's such a powerful concept that changes us biologically, which is wild.
Yeah. Yeah. They say that perception takes experience and it turns it into biology. And so the crazy part about that is that we actually can choose the lens of our experience, and we can convert any experience. Like I can convert me getting in a car and driving to some random spot. I can convert that experience into becoming more like my desired future self or something else. Like literally, I mean, yes, the input matters, but there's like input, process, output. But you get better and better at being the processor so that the input becomes less essential. I mean, obviously over time, you know what I mean? Over time, you do want better and better inputs in terms of more designed, experiences, I guess you could say. But it is crazy. Like, think about it. Your own self, who you are right now, your experience and how you processed that experience brought you to that point.
Yeah.
And so if you think about your future self, and if you start to really like map out and clarify that, then you can essentially take whatever experience you're going to have and convert it into you becoming that person.
Genius. So perception converts
experience into biology. That is the field of epigenetics. Yeah. So your perception shapes experience into biology.
Unbelievable. Well, we could go down a rabbit hole on this, obviously. But where can people can find you? I'm assuming you have a YouTube. Do you have like a web page? We'll put everything into
it's benjaminhardy.com. benjaminhardy.com. That's
cool.
it.
Cool. And you gonna offer any like pre-sales to like see the Google Doc you're working on for the next book, or
only for you and your people?
Okay. Perfect.
Anytime I'll give you a terrible draft. And if you want your opinion, and if you want to give your opinion on it, if anyone wants to read it, you guys, anyone who hears this, I'll send it to you, and you have free access to share it out.
Amazing, dude. Amazing. I'm sure it'll be phenomenal. Man, your work has changed my life. And as a byproduct of that, it's changed millions and millions of people. And so, man, thank you for powering through 2018 and 2019. Dude, thanks for continuing on writing when your first book didn't hit the New York Times bestseller. I'm grateful that you kept going. So
I'm glad it didn't. Yeah, I mean, one of the best forms of learning you can get is that certain goals are trash. Like, honestly, like but they were the goal of my past self. I'm totally cool with that, but it has no meaning to my current self. And a lot of the things I'm probably putting so much meaning on have no meaning to my future self. Not no, but like,
yep.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think it's kind of interesting now when like someone highly celebrates that accolade, because I know so many New York Times bestselling books that like literally aren't that great, but also more than that, like they're not even like selling copies and like making a difference. And so it is funny how your views change on things. That's why the present shapes the meaning of the past. Yep. And so yeah, there's more worthy goals. That's for sure.
100%, man. 100%. Well, dude, thanks for making the time again. And I can't wait to see you continue to change the world.
Hey, man. You too. Talk to you guys later.